All right, let's go ahead and get started. Greetings, fellow scientists. I'd like to welcome you all to the Wisconsin Science Festival online field trip conversation with a naturalist, Mothing 101. So thank you for joining us today. We're ready to get going. My name is Sam from the Wisconsin Science Festival team. And for this field trip experience, we're here with our special guests, naturalist Jeff Steele and filmmaker Mats, who work together to make the Mothing 101 video you may have already watched. So you might be wondering how you can participate today. You'll notice that your picture and audio are muted and that the chat function isn't available. But if you have any questions you'd like to ask, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom. As soon as you have a question, go ahead and type that in right away and we'll ask your question for you out loud during this field trip session today. So this field trip will be recorded, and as always, we ask that you do this and all activities at the Wisconsin Science Festival with a responsible adult. And we'd also like to thank all of our sponsors and partners that helped make the Wisconsin Science Festival possible. So you can find out more about the activities and events during the festival at wisconsinsciencefest.org. And with that, we are excited to get started. So Jeff and Mats, are you ready to go?
Absolutely. Ready.
All right, great. So why don't, Jeff, you can start us off by telling us a little bit more about who you are and your background, and then we'll have Mats do the same.
Okay. Hi, good morning. My name is Jeff Steele, and I am a naturalist and moth enthusiast. A naturalist is somebody who has an interest in studying nature and how it works and the living things that interact with it. I guess you can call me a self-proclaimed nature nerd. So kind of how I got interested in this, when I was a kid, I grew up in a very isolated part of Wisconsin in a very small town. I'm not even sure you could call it a town. My house was at the end of a gravel road in basically the middle of nowhere. And well, I had a lot of friends growing up. It was difficult for me to always see them because I was so far away. So for entertainment, I would just wander the woods and play outside as much as I could. When I got a little older, I kind of resented the fact that I was away from my friends for so often. But as I got even older, I was grateful for the connection that I kind of share with nature. And I slowly came to realize that not everyone has had this opportunity to connect with nature the same way that I did. So it's kind of become my mission to share this admiration and appreciation with nature and all its living things, especially moths and all the creatures that inhabit our ecosystems. So I hope I can share some of that connection with you and encourage you to get outside.
Yeah, excellent. And where in Wisconsin are you from? We might have some folks tuning in today from nearby.
Well, as I said, it's not exactly, it was in pretty much the middle of nowhere. We didn't even have the closest city was Fox Lake, Wisconsin, a town of about 1,000 people. But again, that was still about 3 or 4 miles away. So it was really in the middle of nowhere in township of Westford.
Westford, Wisconsin. Excellent. All right. Thank you for that. And Mats, tell us a little bit more about who you are and your background.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mats Rudels, and I am originally from Stockholm, Sweden. And unlike Jeff, I have always lived in big cities. I lived in the capital of Sweden, Stockholm, and after that I moved to New York, here in America, and I lived in New York for many years. So for me, when I moved here 10 years ago to Madison, was really nice because I was so much closer to nature, and I could come out and I could, discover more nature. So when Jeff asked me to come out and help him with the film, I'm a filmmaker, so I like doing videos and films of all different kinds of things. That's what I mainly did in New York. So when Jeff asked me to come out with him for this adventure out in the woods, that was very exciting. And he took me out there in the middle of the night. So we went out for like 4 or 5 times to be able to capture as many moths as possible. And I was basically just following around with the camera, and I learned so much about moths. Jeff is an excellent storyteller, and he knows so much about the nature. It's amazing. So it's been a great, fun little project that we did together.
Awesome. And it looks like you may be still in the woods. Is that right?
Yeah, Jeff, you're coming back for me soon, right? You said you were going to come back.
Let me know when the moths arrive, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, no, it's easy to be lost here. I've been looking for the exit to this park.
Now,
but find me.
That's great. And it looks like you're very well prepared for some other insects and mosquitoes as well.
Yeah, I must say that one of the things you should definitely do when you're out checking out for moths is get a little mosquito net if you're going to spend a lot of hours, especially here in Madison or in Wisconsin. It seems to be a lot of mosquitoes in the winter or in the summer.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you both for explaining a little bit more about who you are and your background. And just a reminder to all of our participants, if you have any questions you would like for either Jeff or Mats, just feel free to type them into the Q&A function on your Zoom screen, and we will make sure to ask them that out loud. But I do have some questions as well. So one of my main questions after watching that video, Jeff, is what is the difference between moths and butterflies? I know they look really similar, but they're a little bit different.
Yeah, there are a lot of really subtle differences. Some of it depends on the anatomy of a moth versus a butterfly and also the behavior. So obviously butterflies are more likely to be active in the daytime versus the nighttime. Also the wing resting position is different as well. So when a butterfly lands on a flower, for example, the wings are straight up, and you've probably seen a butterfly land like this. But a moth, when it lands on something, it'll kind of have this straight out, like, well, you can look at my shirt and see this kind of the jet plane position of the resting position as well. Also, the antennae are very different from a moth versus a butterfly. A butterfly has these very thin little antennae, and a moth will have these big, huge, you can almost see here, these big feathery kind of plumes. And that's an adaptation that moths have. So if a moth is trying to find a potential mate, it's kind of hard to do so in the dark at night. A butterfly can see, you know, a nice orange potential mate if it's a monarch, for example. But moths have a little trickier time doing that. So moths release these things called pheromones. These are these little chemical signatures in the air, and these giant, you know, feathery antennae can capture these signals in the air and help each other find each other at night because it's so dark. They've done some studies about this too, where they've released these pheromones in one area and tried to see how far the moths would come in order to find these signatures. And the study concluded up to 15 miles away they can find mates in the night sky just by these chemical signatures. And there's some other subtle differences too, like moths will have cocoons and butterflies will have chrysalises, but I can talk about that a little bit later.
Sure. Yeah. So the antennae, they're used to kind of smell.
Exactly. Yeah, their antennae almost serve as like our noses. So it's a way they can smell each other in a way with those chemical signatures.
Interesting. That's fantastic. And you started to mention the difference with chrysalises and cocoons. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? I think that's really fascinating as well.
Yeah. So chrysalises are from butterflies and cocoons are from moths. I guess the easiest difference is that cocoons are kind of furry, actually. And that's another adaptation that moths have over butterflies. So the furry cocoon is to help it over winter, and it almost serves like a little jacket for it, so it can emerge as a moth in the springtime. You usually find cocoons in leaf litter or on a tree or, you know, in a rock. But a butterfly chrysalis, for example, you can think of like those green monarch chrysalises. They're usually very smooth and they're usually dangling somewhere high, like off of a tree branch. And a lot of times they're adapted that way because it's the summertime and they want to blend in with maybe like a leaf. You know, a green chrysalis looks very similar to a leaf. So another adaptation that they have.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned this word adaptation. Can you talk a little bit more about what that actually means?
Of course. So an adaptation is a way for an organism to survive in a way. I guess nature is really cool in that it finds a way to fill any niche environment given the chance. And it has to do with competition as well. So think of a plant growing out of a rock, for example, or think of like a sometimes you see these pictures of a tree growing out of a rock and you think, how can it do that? Why wouldn't it just grow on the ground? But the fact that it can do that means there's not much competition in that environment for it. So that's the way they can adapt to a certain environment to better suit its needs. And I guess that's the best explanation I could think of for that.
Yeah, very good. And you mentioned too a little bit that these furry or fuzzy cocoons help the moths survive through winter. So that was one of my questions as well, is what happens to either moths or butterflies during the winter? Because we don't see them flying around when it's snowy out.
Exactly, that's a good question. And it really depends on the species. Think of like butterflies, for example, are known for their migration. It's pretty unique adaptation for that butterfly to be able to fly from Wisconsin all the way down to Mexico and back again. So some migrate like that. Some moths do overwinter as adults. So, they're flying around and they decide to, find like a nice warm area to snuggle up to and ride out the winter that way. And then they emerge right away in the springtime. But I would say most of them do die during the winter. And they rely on their offspring to kind of, fill in the gap for in the springtime. So most moths do cocoon over winter and then will emerge in the springtime and complete the life cycle in that they find a mate through their pheromones. And then they have caterpillars and those cocoons continue the cycle through winter and so on and so forth. But it does vary.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So they sleep all through winter.
Yeah.
It's a good choice, I think.
Yeah, right? We wish we could do that. Cool. So we do have a couple other questions. So Mrs. Baldwin, or Miss Baldwin's first grade class from Bridges Elementary had some questions for you. So a couple questions really about moths. Why do they fly at night? And maybe similarly, why are they so attracted to light?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a bit difficult to answer. But so not all moths are active at night. There are a few that are active in the daytime. I think there's like a hummingbird moth that will pollinate flowers in the daytime as well. But again, thinking back to adaptations, and nature is really cool in the fact that it will kind of fill in these different environments. And so a moth habitat and a butterfly habitat kind of overlap. They're very similar. They want to also pollinate flowers. They kind of fill in the same kind of environment, but moths have adapted to nighttime. There's no competition for butterflies to kind of hone in on their flowers because they're all asleep. So moths have kind of adapted themselves to the night conditions, and they have a few other adaptations too. For example, moths have these really big eyes, so they can get more light into their eyes and they can see better at night. And also another major difference between butterflies and moths is that moths are furry. If you ever look at a cat or a butterfly versus a moth, a butterfly's body will be very smooth, where a moth will be very furry. And that's not by mistake. And there's a few theories about why this happens. One of my favorites is that it's a little chillier at night. So it's kind of like a natural coat that these moths have where they can keep warm when it gets colder at night. My favorite one has to do with predation though, and bats. So bats eat a lot of moths. And for those that don't know, bats have this thing called echolocation. And echolocation is a way that bats can see at night. And it has to do with these rapid, high-pitched clicking sounds. And bats give off these clicking sounds, and these sounds bounce off like an echo and go back into the bat's ears, and they can almost hone in on the location based upon these echoes. And if a moth has kind of a furry body to it, these echoes don't bounce off it as easily. They're absorbed and kind of moved away a little bit, and it's a very small amount, or maybe a few millimeters, but that could just be the difference between getting eaten by a bat or not eaten by a bat. So
Wow.
It's a longer answer than maybe you needed for why moths fly at night, but just that they're adapted to do that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that about the furry bodies, and that's more of a padded protection from bats. That's very interesting. So we do have a couple other questions. Let's see here. Travis is wondering, do any animals eat cocoons or chrysalises? Sometimes you mentioned that they're sometimes hidden or camouflaged.
Yeah, well, they've there are a lot of animals that are opportunists. So, like, think of a raccoon, for example. A hungry raccoon won't just eat one thing; it'll eat many things. You know, it'll eat garbage, or it'll find a little critter. And if it can find a cocoon, it will certainly eat it. But moths are very clever; they're very crafty creatures, and they're very well adapted to finding the perfect hiding spot. Because if they didn't, they would all be eaten and there wouldn't be any moths at all. So they must be good at it. But yeah, if a little furry critter is looking for a nice juicy cocoon as a snack, they will certainly eat it if they can find it.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of being opportunists, how do moths get into your house without you noticing it?
That's a really good question. They can enter your house on purpose or by accident. For example, moths are attracted to lights. So if you leave your porch light on, moths are bound to congregate around the light source. And if there's a door nearby, all you have to do is open the door and they can sneak inside. Sometimes when the conditions outside are windy or stormy, they like to find a nice little dry crack to sneak in to kind of weather out the storm. And that dry crack may actually be an entry into your home, like a crack in a door or something. And there are even two species of moth that will feed on wool, on clothes. I'm sure you've heard about moths maybe eating clothes, so watch your closets for those moths.
That's the only moths we had when I was living in New York, was the ones in the closets.
City moths, right?
The city moths, exactly. They're not just party animals, they're city moths too, so.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit more about the different types of moths and what they look like. So we have some questions about, like, what is the largest moth and how big is it?
Yeah, so the largest moth in the world is the aptly named Hercules moth. The Hercules moth is from Australia and has a wingspan of 14 inches. So I think my hand is about 8 inches across. So if you can imagine, it's close to this size, a giant moth, just truly incredible. And what's even more incredible is that this moth spends 2 years inside of a cocoon and then only lives for 2 days. So it spends 2 years growing to be this big, huge moth, and then it's alive for 2 days, and it has 2 days to find a mate, and then repeat the cycle. So it spends a lot of energy for those 2 days, and hopefully the weather is good when it comes out, but it's pretty incredible.
Wow, that's really interesting. Mats, do you have any pictures of these moths on your camera still?
I don't right now. I should have brought some pictures maybe. But I don't have any pictures of the Hercules moth anyway. I think the biggest moth we had was the one that Jeff was holding in his hand when we were out there filming, which was, a mixture of excitement and scary.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was very large and very interested in us. So sometimes you'll get lucky enough to have a close encounter with a large moth.
Yeah, definitely. And that was really cool to see in the video. So Mats, I think you mentioned that you went out at night a couple times to try and get these moths on camera. Can you talk a little bit about how difficult it is to get these actors to cooperate when you're trying to get them in a movie?
They are very sensitive to weather and climate and things like that. So you want to find the right evening where there's like nice warm weather outside, a little bit of humidity seemed to work best. And what we found when we went out all these different nights too was that every night there was different moths showing up. So I think that made it really interesting that it's an event you can do all summer long, and you can see how different moths is like more common during different times of the year. We used all these brilliant hacks that Jeff had already done, where we were painting the trees with all this sugary stuff. So in that sense, it was kind of easy to find the moths on the good nights, because once they were a good night, they came, and there were a lot of them around. So just make sure you get the little like painting of that sugary stuff on a bunch of trees, and then patience and light. They like the lights too. So it wasn't that hard to find them, I would say. It was hard to get them to sit still a lot of times, because of course when you shine the light on them too, they're like, oh, look at that. That's a much brighter light. Let's go to that. And then they start chasing me instead, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that's awesome. The video is really, really neat. So Mats, talking about the pictures in your camera, we have another question from Travis, who's wondering, what are the latest pictures on your camera, and how often do you download your new images?
Well, it depends on which camera you're talking about. I have many different cameras. And I have, of course, my phone camera that I take more snappy shots every day. And that's where you see mostly pictures of my kids. Then I have my work cameras, where there's more pictures of people talking about things. I don't always get to do fun stuff like hanging out with Jeff in the middle of the night in the woods. Most of the time I'm in people's offices and filming people when they're talking about not always fun stuff, but always interesting stuff. So the last pictures on my camera, my work camera, is all pictures of the film of doctors talking about COVID and stuff like that. And then my other cameras is my kids and my puppy.
Nice. Yeah, so that's interesting to think about too, now that we have cameras on our phones that we can go out and take pictures of nature all around us, and you know, kind of do the same thing. And we can get pictures and videos of moths whenever we see them, or butterflies, or other nature, other items in nature. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, phones are really good to take pictures even at night nowadays. But otherwise, I would recommend, if you're planning to take pictures of moths or film moths, to bring a tripod, because it's very dark, so you need like longer shutter speeds and all that. Even with a phone camera, you might want to keep a tripod around to make sure if you want to photograph and get really sharp pictures or sharp video of it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're approaching the end of our time here. I have a couple more questions. So maybe you both could mention too, if anybody on our call today is interested in getting involved in being either a naturalist or a filmmaker, what kind of classes or subjects best prepare you to study what you guys are into?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different fields of biology, and if you're interested in nature, biology is really the foundation of our natural world. So it's a study of living things, and I really encourage you to look into environmental classes too, understanding kind of the natural world that we live in and our place in it, as well as understanding the kind of the chemistry and the biology that's happening as well, because all of these play an important role in understanding nature. And it's really interesting to kind of learn some of the secrets about nature, and why things work the way they do. And you really understand that everything is really connected. Every caterpillar depends on a certain plant, and this plant depends on something else, and it's all a big connected ecosystem. And it's really rewarding once you get enough information to be able to make these connections.
Yeah, for sure. And Mats, what about you? If they're interested in becoming a filmmaker, what would you recommend for classes or subjects to study?
I would say that for me, filmmaking or cameras have always been an opportunity to be able to see things and get to places that people normally don't get to. And I think the best way to learn filmmaking and photography is to do it always and a lot. There's a lot of like good classes now where you can take online and stuff, where you can get just the basics, but just do it over and over again. Be curious, find new ways of doing it, experiment, and then ask people, like, try to get onto things like Jeff asked me. But, you know, otherwise I would ask him, like, can I come out with you in the woods? Can I have the opportunity to follow you around with the camera and film it? And yeah, basically just keep on doing it.
Yeah, definitely. Practice makes perfect, right?
Yeah.
Great. And with the last few minutes, I'm interested to know, Jeff, what are some resources, or maybe if there's some like citizen science projects that you know of that anybody can look into or learn more about if they're interested in either moss or becoming a naturalist?
There are all sorts of projects, and I feel like I could talk for hours about them all, but one of them is there's one called National Moth Week. So in July, I think it's the end of July, they encourage people to kind of leave their porch lights on, do some of the ways to attract moths that I talk about in the video, and take pictures and kind of send that out to their massive database, and people will identify them and talk about them, and it's a way for them to track, you know, what moths are in what areas. But there are all sorts of projects too. If you Google, you know, especially with the DNR, they have a lot of different monitoring projects. For example, if you're interested in frogs, they'll send you this training module where you can listen to different frog and toad calls. And then in the spring, you can go to certain areas they want monitored and see if you can hear those frogs and toads. And it's important for them to know what the populations of these frogs are, because a lot of them aren't doing so well with some habitat loss. But if you can think of an animal or something that you're interested in, odds are there's some kind of citizen science monitoring project that you can get into.
Yeah, definitely. And even the word citizen science is just, or the phrase citizen science is really cool, because it really makes you understand that anybody can be a scientist. I think, Mats, you mentioned you just got to be curious, right? You just got to
Never stop being curious. Yep.
Yeah.
I think me and Jeff is going out into the woods in the winter next time to do our next little film project together.
We sure are. Winter Ecology 101.
All right. Well, we can't wait to see that one. That's for sure. And I do have one last question, and this might be either an easy one or a hard one for both of you. But what is your favorite part about doing what you do? So, Jeff, why don't you start us off? What is your favorite part about either studying moss or just studying nature in general?
Yeah, again, it kind of goes off of the kind of fascination that I have with once you understand something or find out some mystery or see some secret, process happen. Like last spring, for example, I was walking through the woods, and I saw this mulberry tree, and there were these buds on it. And it was the moment that the buds were releasing their pollen, and you could almost hear it clicking, and you look up and there were these tiny little poofs of the yellow, and that was its moment of releasing its pollen. And the fact that you could see that, was very special. And if you're curious enough and you have a keen eye, anytime you go outside, you can find these really special processes happening. And if you do enough research, you can find out why this is happening, and then you can share that special moment with somebody else, and say, hey, I saw this really cool thing, and then maybe they can see it next time. So it's really connecting us with nature that kind of drives me to do this, and that's what I really enjoy about it.
That's fantastic. And what about you, Mats? What is your favorite part about filmmaking, and maybe specifically filmmaking with nature?
I think my favorite thing is that every day is different. You never know what's going to happen that day. So you always go in with an open mind, and you get to meet people, you get to see things. And it also makes you take the time to slow down and look around, because everything goes so fast nowadays. So as a filmmaker, you have to find that piece and just stop, look around and see what's going on before you start filming it. And I think that's really what I like most about what I'm doing. Plus I got to meet Jeff.
There you go. Working together in collaboration is definitely a huge part of being a scientist. And I love what you're leaving us with here today, is that really just stopping and looking around and being curious and exploring is really what it's all about. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. And thank you to all of our participants. We had some great questions. And thank you just in general for joining us at the Wisconsin Science Festival. A recording of this field trip, just as a reminder, will be available, and we'll follow up with the teachers about that after this session. And the Wisconsin Science Festival continues this whole weekend with events hosted by organizations from all across the state that you can participate in. You can just go to wisconsinsciencefest.org for some more fun science. So thank you, Jeff and Mats, for joining us today. And thank you, for everyone at home or in school for joining us today as well. And we hope to see you at either another session or at some other Science Festival events. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.